Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I have 10 authors that I have not read a book from yet, but I want to sometime in the near future. Now there are a couple authors on this list that I actually don't think I'm even going to like their books, but I feel like they are either a staple of a genre or get talked about so much that I feel like I need to experience it at least once for myself. And the inspiration for this list is actually an author that I did read a book from, and that is China Miéville. And the inspiration is because the book I read was the book of Elsewhere, and that is technically a co-written book with Keanu Reeves based on Keanu Reeves' comic book series called Berserker. So I didn't think that it was a fair evaluation of China Miéville, of himself. I have heard mostly mixed to negative things about the book of Elsewhere, but I've heard so many things about Miéville as a writer on their own that I feel like it is a disservice to the author to not read one of their own individual works. Now, there are going to be a couple of books for each author that I mentioned that I'm interested in, and I would love any feedback if you think the books that I'm mentioning are a good starting place for that author or if I should start somewhere else. I don't know too much about any of these authors other than, I hear about them a lot, or, they have high praise, or I feel like they're a staple, like I mentioned earlier. So for China Miéville, I have Perdido Street Station. Now, I've heard this is a really weird one, and it's maybe not necessarily the best place to start with them as an author, but I do feel like this is the one that is talked about the most, and it is kind of the one that has piqued my interest the most. There's another story by him called Kraken, which just sounds like a super weird out there book, but from the short synopsis I did read of it, it kind of hooked me. And so I don't know if either of those are a good or a bad starting place, but for that author, there are two books that I'm interested in starting from them. China is one of those authors that I hear so many people talk about, and they just either really love his stuff or they're just like really confused by it. And so when you kind of have that duality of an author, it's something that I'm kind of drawn to and I want to experience it for myself. Next up is an author who a lot of times gets related to the dude bro kind of books, and that is John Williams, most known probably for Stoner, and that is actually the book that I think I would probably want to start with him from. The other two that I am more familiar with are Augustus, and there is something Crossing. I can't remember what I think it's Butcher's Crossing is the third book that I've heard from this author. Now, this is somebody who I think has only written 4 novels because they died rather young, but everybody I know who I value their opinion talks about this author with such reverence and just like points out things about this author that I'm either going to love or I'm going to hate. And once again, that duality is something that I'm always looking for when I'm, moving outside of particularly the fantasy and sci-fi genre. This is obviously more of a literary fiction kind of writer, but some of it sounds like it could be so boring, but also at the same time so riveting. So Stoner is where I think I would start this journey at. Once again, if that's not the best place to start with John Williams, I would love to hear it from you guys. Now, next up is the first author who I actually don't think I'm going to really enjoy their books, and this is probably a hot take, especially for somebody who mostly reads fantasy, and that is Guy Gavriel Kay. Now, the reason I say I don't think I like his books is a lot of times when I hear people talk about it, they talk about he has like kind of more low magic, it's much more lyrical, and it can be rather slow. And sometimes that combination of things do not work for me, and then other times they do. So, it's one of those things. But there are many of his stories that I have just kind of heard discussed that I'm not sure I would be super drawn to. Now, all of that being said, I feel like he is a rather important person in the fantasy genre, and that the people who really do connect with his books really connect with his books. And now, obviously, he has a decent enough sized bibliography, I think that's what you call it, that obviously not every single book is going to be a hit for everybody. I know there are some mixed opinions about this, but I've always thought about starting with Tigana. It's a standalone that he has, or The Lines of Al Rassan, I think is another one that I have considered starting. Tigana is still the first one that I normally think of when I think of this author. So while I'm hesitant to start him, I feel like he's one of those authors that I need to kind of scratch off on my bingo card of authors to just kind of have like a credibility or, a wider sense of the fantasy genre as a whole, because it's so easy to kind of go down one rabbit hole and stay in there. And I like to expand that. And I think Guy Gavriel Kay will be somebody who kind of expands my literary knowledge and, maybe push me towards something that I like compared to some of the other stuff that I have read. Next up, as somebody who does really, really like science fiction, I feel like this is another one of those authors that I absolutely just have to read for nothing other than the fact that they are a giant of the genre, and that would be Isaac Asimov. I am embarrassed to say that I have never read Foundation or I, Robot, which I feel like are the two main books that people point to with Asimov. I don't know if there's maybe a better starting place than either of those. Foundation seems to be like the one. That is one of the pinnacles, foundational series of sci-fi. And the fact that I have not read it or anything from Asimov, I feel like is a black stain on my resume of a science fiction reader. I have started to do some things this year in particular to start chipping away at some of those authors that I feel like are really important to the sci-fi genre that I have not read yet. Somebody like Paul Anderson or Robert Silverberg. Those are some of the authors that I have read this year that I feel like are filling in some of those blanks, and Peter Watts would be another one who I feel like those are authors that I need to read, and I feel like I'm probably missing the biggest one with Isaac Asimov. So I am obviously drawn to the Foundation series foremost, just because that's like the big one, right? I do have like a soft spot for that really bad Will Smith I, Robot movie. And so I do kind of want to read that just for that fact alone. I don't know everything about that series. I think there's like a lot of books in that series. So I don't know if there's like one in particular story that you can read and kind of get the gist of everything that's going on there with I, Robot. But those are kind of the two that I think about with Isaac Asimov. And I feel like I really do need to get to those books. Next up is a author who's kind of new to me, but people whose opinion I really respect and have gotten really good recommendations for in the past have been speaking really highly about this author for it seems like a while now, but he feels new to me, and that would be David Mitchell. Now, he's another one of those authors that his books are talked about very strangely. So the one that I'm drawn to the most is probably Cloud Atlas, and it's so funny because most of the people who I know who have read this and then ended up really liking it talk about like the first 50 or so pages or the first little section of this book is awful, or maybe not awful is the best way to say it, but I've heard, that it's just not the best time. And then all of a sudden you kind of get past that initial hump and it soars to the moon, and I don't know if fantastic or great is the best way to describe it, but it seems like it is such a unique journey, and it's a book that is so out there, and sometimes I like that. I like to be challenged by a book, and it really seems like David Mitchell, either with Cloud Atlas, the other one I hear about is Bone Clocks, that those are two books from him that just really push to the extent of what you can do when writing a book. And once again, it comes back to that is the kind of a thing every now and again I want to experience. Like there's a time and a place for like a nice cozy fantasy read, something that I'm going to be used to. I know the tropes, all of those things. And then there are other times where I want my brain to just kind of like be mushed into a new kind of shape. And it seems like David Mitchell is maybe one of those people who has the ability to do that with writing. Now, I'm going to probably get a lot of negative feedback for what I'm about to say about this next author, but this is an author I have talked about many times that I don't think I will like his writing, mostly because of the writing that he does. I don't think it's going to be something I connect with. I have a really hard time connecting with humor in books, especially British humor, like Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's one of my least favorite books I've ever read. Like I did not connect with it. I didn't think it was funny. I thought it was extremely boring. Just everything about it. That kind of really dry, sarcastic, I can't even call it humor because it's not funny to me, but that kind of style is not something that worked for me. And you've probably figured out who I'm talking about, but that would be Terry Pratchett, most famous for Discworld. I have considered starting with like Guards. I feel like that's one of the many recommended places to start with Terry Pratchett. And I'm so hesitant to do it because I don't want to read it and be like the wet blanket. I don't want to be the one guy who's like, yeah, I don't think it's all that great or anything like that. And I just really feel like that kind of writing style is not going to be something that I'm able to connect with. And I think I have even made a video that this is one of the series that I think I'm just going to completely stay away from. But I feel like I'm doing such a disservice once again to that like resume of like wanting to experience like the big ones for certain genres. And I feel like Terry Pratchett is that guy, right? I feel like not reading Discworld and calling yourself a fantasy fan is like, you're just not like completing the task, right? And I know this is all arbitrary and I'm making things up for myself, but that's kind of what I like to do. And so yeah, Terry Pratchett, Discworld, I feel like there are some standalones. I don't even know what standalones he has written outside of Discworld, but I think there are at least a few. And I have also thought about maybe, okay, let's step away from Discworld, this big magnum opus that he has. It's like 40 something books, and maybe read one of the standalones that people still have in high regard. So I would absolutely love to hear some like different starting places for Terry Pratchett if you could leave that down in the comments. And like I said, I know that people love Discworld, and so to say what I just said is blasphemy, and I might get blasted for it, but just my experience with that kind of humor and the things that people say about those books, I just don't think it's going to be for me, which is fine. I'm glad if it's for you, that I want it to be for you. I want it to be for me too. I just don't think that's going to be the case. Now, another more literary fiction, I guess you could call him. I don't even really know what most people consider Murakami as, and that is the author I'm talking about now. Obviously, Kafka by the Shore, I think, is probably the most well-known from him, and I've heard just his writing is really surreal and very strange. I think what's another one? 1Q84 is another one that is really popular from him. But he's an author that I, once again, feel like he gets talked about in very high regard. The people who really connect with him, and the ones who don't. But having that duality, and like, when I see a book that has like a 2.7, well, maybe 2.7 is a little bit low, but when there's not like a lot of middle ground with a book where people either really dislike it or really love it, that's a book that really draws me into it because it means it makes people feel something. I think there's so many times where things just congeal and you don't really like feel any like big emotions, which is what I'm really looking for. I always say I'm a moments reader, and it's because I want those big moments, whether they be like happy, sad, heroic, any of those kinds of big emotional moments is what I'm looking for. And I feel like this is maybe an author who delivers on those moments, but in different ways than a lot of the other books I read. But what I'm getting at here is a polarizing author is one that I'm kind of drawn to, and that is why he is on this list. He is a Japanese author, so that kind of checks off some of my other reading outside of like the US UK bubble. And so I'm just really interested to kind of see maybe some cultural differences, or I don't know, any kind of things that he's explored. I have heard there's some like weird, like a lot of weird stuff with women, which sometimes is one of those things that like it either works or it doesn't. And so I am a little nervous with some of that stuff just because I've heard it can be really weird. So he is an author that I want to explore, and he is an author that I know has a lot of short stories, and so I think he might be a good option to read like a short story collection rather than one of those like main standalone novels. And if you think that's a good idea, definitely I'm super open to hearing that as well. Next up is another one of those big sci-fi authors, and I don't think this person is as big as Asimov by any means, but I'm talking about Neal Stephenson. I think the one that most people would know from him is Snow Crash, and that's definitely the one that I am most familiar with. I think the other one is Ananthem is how you say it. It looks like Anthem, but it's Unanthem. Those are like really the two that I think I would consider, probably starting with Snow Crash as a first one. But I have heard he's very experimental. Again, common theme throughout this video of people who are experimenting, kind of pushing boundaries, making you ask strange questions and explore different kinds of ideas and themes. So he feels like he is another one of those. He almost feels like he's in a similar vein as William Gibson, who did Neuromancer. I think there's some kind of that cyberpunk feel to at least Snow Crash, I believe. And I don't know, that can be a weird thing for me depending on what way the technology goes. I need it to at least make some sense a lot of times. I can't deal with just like technology that is basically magic sometimes when you're trying to propose it to me in a way that is very scientific. I struggle with that sometimes in books, so I'm not sure exactly what line he rides when it comes to that, especially with Snow Crash. I don't know too much about Ananthem other than the name. So he's another one of those authors though that I feel like has some books that are talked about a lot, and they're polarizing once again because they kind of are pushing boundaries again. My penultimate author here is another fantasy author, and he has quite a different kind of fantasy. I think most of his stuff could almost be considered literary or historical fiction, not literary, but that would be Bernard Cornwell. I think his biggest series is probably the Warlord Chronicles. I'm not 100% sure that's where I want to start. I did watch some of that show and enjoyed it. It's on Netflix. He has a standalone called Stonehenge that I heard was pretty good. He also has the Sharp series that some people I really connect with their opinion on a lot of stuff, has talked highly about that. That's a super long series though, once again. So and then I would be remiss if I don't mention the Warlord Chronicles. I know a lot of people here really like that trilogy, which is like an Arthurian retelling, and I've never been like a King Arthur person. I actually barely know anything about it. I know there are some people who really like that story and really connect with it and everything. That's not me. So he seems like one of those authors who just has a lot of really good stories, and a lot of people speak really highly of him, and once again just kind of like a foundational series author a little bit here. So he is somebody I am interested in going. And then the final author here, who I feel like is the biggest blemish on my reading resume, is absolutely Ursula K. Le Guin. I can't believe I've never read anything from her, from The Dispossessed, The Left Hand of Darkness, Ursi, just so many things that she has written. She is like a pillar of so many genres, and just from all accounts one of the best authors that has ever lived, who explores all kinds of ideas and themes. And the fact that I have yet to read anything from her, I think, like I said, just a huge black mark against me. I feel like I hear people talk about her so much, and I want to be able to be a part of those conversations, or at least have an informed opinion on some of the things she's going after. That, once again, so many people's opinion that I value have her super high, or her individual books super high up in their rankings, have her as an individual author super high in her rankings, and really seems like she is an author who is able to tackle like a wide variety of topics, genres, and everything, and even levels of like reading ability. And so she's just somebody who I'm almost intimidated to read her, because I feel like she's just on like a whole nother level or something. And so she is another author that I definitely want to get to. And she is another one who I sometimes feel like I have choice paralysis, because it feels like there's so many good options that I end up not picking any and just kind of moving on. But I definitely want to get to her sooner than later. But that is my list of authors that I have not read just yet, but definitely want to sometime here in the future. Let me know some of your, resume black marks that you have when it comes to author. I know we all have that author that we haven't read just yet, but we really need to get to. There are more that I could probably put on this list. The first one that comes to my head is Robin Hobb. I haven't read any Robin Hobb yet, but she definitely feels like another one who definitely needs to be a part of this list, and somebody who I need to read pretty well. But once again, let me know all of that down below in the comments. And that's all from me, and have a good one.